Okay, I think we are live. Hello, I am Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Before I get into it today, I want to make sure that we are actually live on Rumble. And looky there, we are! Yay! Oh, yay. Last week, if you'll recall, I was actually having some difficulties with that, much to my chagrin, and to the irritation of anyone who may have tapped on the Rumble links when I posted them everywhere. So this week, I did something a little bit differently, and I decided I'm going to confirm that things are actually going on Rumble before I spread any links around. And thankfully, it has. So it'll just take a second. Live on Rumble is actually working. Alrighty. So now I just got to copy and paste that message 5 billion times. But whilst we are doing that, a very happy hello to Crazy Witch, aka Marcus. Glad to have you here with me, sir. I'm going to be catching everybody up on some of the darings and do's of the other content creators I worked through on Gilded. Firstly, Paddy's Parlour games. He apparently is posting on Rumble these days, and he made a cute Mother's Day crafting video. Got a link to his stuff in the Gilded group. So definitely check him out. Then Druid Foxx of the Druid's Den. This morning she posted an open invite to people for a celebration of the apple blossoms. Druid Foxx, she's very keen on looking to the local cues and nature where she lives, which is quite a ways north. And so last week she just now posted pictures of daffodils, and this week apparently the apple blossoms are finally arriving for her. And so she's wanting to make an occasion for that. It'll be held on Saturday, May 27th, 2023. And if you are interested in joining in person, which if you're in Minnesota, that could be a possibility. Or if you would like to join in spirit, as always, just give her a shout. You can contact her through her blog, or you could come on to Gilded, leave a message for her in her Soapbox channel, and ask her there, and she will get you situated. She's always very happy to have people join her in person or in spirit. See, next, Georgia Liberty, the Wiccan Conservative. She has taken to posting clip of last week's Thursday afternoon live stream, the one that she had with myself and Puritan Vue, aka Amanda, where we talked a lot about the education system and just, I mean, what on earth is going on there. So sometimes we post in the middle of the day. A lot of people work, and they definitely work jobs that don't exactly allow them to listen to podcasts. So you aren't always able to catch it in the moment. And sometimes, you don't always have time to listen to an hour plus conversation later on. So what she's done is that she has been making clips of the highlights. So even if you can't get the full conversation, you can get some of the really good zingers in there. So that's something to keep in mind. And she's been posting them on her YouTube channel. We do like streaming to Rumble. For one thing, the audience is bigger, way bigger, because Rumble actually lets people reach people, unlike YouTube, who once they decide you're guilty of wrongthink, won't let you reach anyone. It's extremely irritating. But Rumble isn't like that. So that's why we love Rumble, and that's why we are part there these days. Speaking of Rumble, another member of the Brew, the Grun Gregerson of the Universal Pagan Temple. She and her husband have started doing more spiritual videos lately, and they are posting them on Rumble. The most recent one had to do with the Celtic Pantheon, so definitely go to her Rumble link. I do have it in the description box. And just give her some love there. Give her a like, give her a subscribe, and let her know that you are still following her, because YouTube was definitely giving her the business too. Not much fun. And then, of course, I cannot fail to mention Gandalf Freyasson of the True North EuroFaith newsletter. If you get his newsletter, you'll know that he prepares and posts a lot of different memes that are inspirational, or that remind us of our roots, or that encourage people to carry on in their pagan journey, and why it's such a good thing. And you will also see him post this on in his Soapbox channel at Blackbird's Brew, and places like Gab. He's fairly active there. But you can always count on having his content at Blackbird's Brew on Gilded. So giving him a little bit of love for his efforts would not go amiss. I think he is our eldest member. He is our elder. So I think it's important to remind him that he is loved and that his contributions are valued. Then the member Haunted Pagan, he shared a video about Blackbeard the Pirate last week on his Rumble channel. So if you have not taken the opportunity to watch that yet, definitely go do so because it's a good time. It's never a bad day when you hear a good story about pirates. And then lastly, we of course have Raven Wolfgar. He's in need of some more eyes for his restoration project. He has his own, not just a soapbox channel, but a soapbox forum because he's sharing PDF files and various different content that he's reviewing, trying to separate. Pagan fact from pagan fiction, namely ideological fiction, and his idea is that he wants to get down to the core of what do we actually know about the Norse tradition as it was. So anything you can do to help him with that, I know will be really greatly appreciated. And of course, as I alluded to earlier, all the links for all of the Blackbird's Brew content creators are in the description box, as is the link to join the Gilded group. Let's see. In other news, last Wednesday, the group had a really wonderful discussion about the restoration of masculinity in society and why that matters, how this might go about, and why it's important, because it absolutely is. I mean, we have had a gynocentric world for far too long, and I mean, let's be real. It's very difficult to get the balance between the masculine and the feminine just right, but I think we could have less toxic extremes for sure. But it was pretty insightful, especially since several of the gentlemen of our group actually favored us with their company and their thoughts. And it's amazing what happens when people actually talk to each other and listen. I mean, it changes the whole dynamic of society. Other people should give it a go from time to time. Let's see. And forgive me for referring to my notes. I'm trying not to ramble as much this week. But this Wednesday, our group chat on Wednesday at the Gilded Group, it will be open topic. And of course, anyone who wants to share pictures of how their garden is growing this year, whether you're growing your vegetables or your fruits or herbs or just some really pretty flowers, whatever it is that you're doing, by all means, share those pictures and let's just have a nice visit. Also, if you are a member of the Gilded Group or you decide to become one, please remember to vote in the new poll. I'm asking the members to weigh in on the topic for Thursday's live stream with Georgia Liberty and Puritan Vue. And whatever topic gets the most votes by Wednesday evening's group chat, that will be the winner, and that'll be announced then. Let's see. Ah, and hello to Haunted Pagan on the Rumble. So glad to have you here. All righty. So next, I think we are ready to actually discuss the topic at hand. That is progress that is being made in the American Paganism and Witchcraft Project. And I have already knocked over my microphone. So good. That's becoming tradition when we do these live streams. I have to knock it over at least once. But one of the things that I have altered is that this morning I did add a general chat room under this category. And it's for brainstorming and theorizing and discussion in a more off the cuff, relaxed, informal sort of way. And I'm hoping that format will help encourage more people to participate. I hope it'll take some of the pressure off, just in case anyone's worried, like, I've got to get something really scholastic and intelligent to say. Yeah, I don't want anyone to go into this project with that kind of feeling in their brain. That's definitely not the vibe we're looking for. Whatever you have to say, and I'm hoping that by having just kind of a general chat area, as things come up in people's minds, they'll just bring it up there, and we'll see where those conversations take us. We will find out. It will be interesting. Also, in the surveys channel, I have put up 3 multiple choice polls. I've noticed that the multiple choice polls are a little bit more popular than the open-ended questions of the surveys. I still hope people will respond to the surveys, but until people get a little bit more comfortable, I'm going to make more of an effort to put up polls. The first poll asks whether or not people are in favor of incorporating cultural and secular holidays into kind of the American pagan calendar. Are these things that we are going to embrace? And it's an interesting question because some of our cultural and secular holidays, I mean, they really lend itself. I mean, certainly Thanksgiving, the idea of coming together as families and as communities and saying, setting differences aside for about 5 minutes to at least have a decent meal together and having appreciation for all the hard work that it took to bring that meal about, from the people who grew the crops and raised the animals to the people who sold the products in the grocery stores and the efforts of the people who cooked it. There's a lot to really come together about about. And it seems like a really natural time to, also give honor to some of our pagan gods. I mean, someone like Thor, for example, I have honored him on Thanksgiving before. Frigga, certainly. I tend to get very nesty in the month of November. So by the time Thanksgiving rolls around, I'm in kind of this full de facto matriarch kind of mode of wanting to make sure everything's taken care of and everybody's comfortable and everyone's well fed. And that seems to be a vibe that is also shared by the goddess Frigga. So little things like that. And then there are other celebrations that, aren't quite as natural to us. It doesn't, and this is really with more of our secular holidays. Now, I'm not referring to Independence Day because there is not a pagan people that ever existed that did not view the self-determination of their own people and the importance of keeping their people as a unit. No one doubted that importance. I mean, that's a very natural thing, and there's plenty of rather visionary sort of gods who we could see on Independence Day. Like Labor Day, to the second poll question of, do people think that Labor Day has been sufficiently removed from its Marxist origins to where it is acceptable to us on a cultural level, and to where it's also worthy for us to put a little bit of our spirituality into it? And feelings are really mixed about this, and for good reason, because, Labor Day, anyone who has studied any kind of cultural Marxism or any of their tactics that they use, they always like to say that they promote the worker. They don't, of course. If you studied their history, you also know that. But you see the issue. But on the other hand, there is honor and a job well done, whether you are running a company or whether you are the janitor. If you are doing a good job at whatever your profession happens to be, that is honorable. So I don't see anything wrong in and of itself of using that day essentially to celebrate those things, and also to give honor to the gods who really do promote hard work. I mean, what about the Celtic god Lu, the god of all the trades and all the skills and all the crafts? I mean, certainly that would seem like a time to say, we really do, we appreciate the example that he sets in that. And I'm hearing from Marcus. He says, Labor Day should be for people who work for their hands day. Yeah, absolutely. That should be a day for celebrating the trades. I really like that idea. And when Labor Day comes around this year, I might just bring that up because I think that'd be something worth thinking about. And hello to Paddy. I see he has joined me on Rumble. Glad to have you here, sir. Missed you, but I did put a plug in for you for the video that you posted on Rumble the other day. So glad to support you. Paddy's been a really wonderful supporter of me, especially on Twitter, and in making people aware of, the work that I and the other group members do. So he's been a huge sounding board for that. So that is very much appreciated. Hearing again from Marcus saying Labor Day, Trade and Craft Day. Yeah, I could absolutely go along with it. I could go in with that. Next time you're at Blackbird's Brew, Marcus, definitely bring that up in the discussion, because I think that's something I would love to get the other members' reaction to that, because that's something that I don't think anyone would really disagree with. Let's see. Now, the third poll is, let's see, where am I in my notes? Okay. Yes, the third poll that I posted today that I actually had to edit because the way I phrased the question, it wasn't a yes or no question, but for the poll responses, I put yes, no, and I'm not sure, which was stupid of me, which just goes to show that my tea had absolutely not took in yet. But I was asking about language. Essentially, should we use terms of another languages to refer to our pagan holy days and for our spiritual concepts, or essentially should we be using plain English because that's our common tongue? And there's a lot of arguments that could be made on either side about that, and for good reason. Because for one, all of us have taken the trouble to learn a lot of those older terms in other languages. And, you could always make the argument of, it's not broken, Brigantia. Why are you trying to fix it? Quit, bad. Don't make things more complicated. But then, on the other side, I think there's also an argument to be made of, why do we have to go outside of our own language to talk when we have words that will convey what we mean? For instance, lunasa. why are we saying Lunasa instead of something like Lu's Feast? Because it actually translates as the Festival of Lu. And if someone asks you, oh, you're doing some sort of holiday, what is that holiday? What's going to be easier to explain, Lunasa or Lu's Feast? Because, Lunasa, that's a different word. And then you get into this etymology. And if someone's, they're not really asking about the etymology and the history of that word when they're asking what we're celebrating and why. Whereas if you say Lu's Feast, that implies to them that we are feasting and celebrating someone called Lu. And then that allows you to answer the actual question that was asked, which is, what is this? Why is it important? And you can say, oh, well, this Celtic god Lu, he was the master of all trades and crafts, and we really honor him. And it's about hard work and the sacrifice that it takes and the rewards you get from that, and on and on and on. And then, the person who asked you that question, they can come away feeling like they've had an answer and not like they've gotten a history lesson. So I think there's that to really consider when it comes to the language issue. And another thing is that, our ancestors, they used their own language to describe things. They weren't concerned with what someone halfway around the world called something. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of language is to communicate. So they used their common tongue to communicate things, whether it was, about their celebrations, or they were asking someone if a particular chore had gotten done, or they were discussing any kind of concept at all. They were using the terms with which they were familiar with. So why wouldn't we be using English? I mean, and it is a serious question that's really I've been turning over in my mind, because there's nothing unholy about our language. There's nothing more sacred about using other languages to describe the same freaking thing. And I'm just wondering, is this something that are we creating difficulties for ourselves by not using plain English? It's just a thought that I've, you know, it keeps going around in my brain. And Marcus says, he says to use whatever terms or language that you're comfortable with, which, ultimately that's what people do anyway. Can't argue with that. And then Paddy, it was saying, I think doing a little bit of both. It's like learning anything, crawl, walk, run, even though I prefer the real and intended language. Well, I mean, it was our ancestors' real and intended language, but that's not the language that we speak anymore. And that's kind of what I'm really getting at. I don't think that speaking English is less real than my ancestors who spoke Proto-German or Old Norse or anything else like that. You see what I mean? You see why I kind of, I'm just spending a little bit of time thinking about that sort of thing. And that's why I started this whole project, so we could kind of peel back the layers in our opinions. Okay, here's our first impulse. Now, why do we think about that? What are the counter arguments? What are the supporting points? What's eventually going to turn into an arrangement that's livable for most people? Because I think about that too. What's going to be practical? And Mark is saying, I go with plain, simple Appalachian hillbilly language. Yes, you do. And you absolutely make yourself understood. And I think that's an important thing, particularly as we go on in time and continue to teach about pagan concepts, traditions, gods, and of course, how we evolve as American pagans. Use the terms that people are going to understand. So this has already sparked a pretty lively discussion, which, hooray, that is the whole goal. And I hope everyone knows that I'm not bringing this up just for the sake of stirring the pot and seeing, if we could get a little controversy, because no, I'm too old. I'm too old to be doing that for no good reason. I really want to hear people's line of reasoning, no matter what they think on this subject, because I think it's important. I think it matters, especially over the long term. Okay. Let's see. And then that brings me to another philosophical point that I've really been pondering about the approach that American pagans take to spirituality. I mean, what I have observed in others, what I've certainly experienced and done myself, is that it tends to be this approach where you take everything else in the world into consideration before thinking about what you think, or thinking about where you are and what's practical and what isn't. And that's a very outside in kind of approach, and not just outside in, it's everybody else but me. It's everybody else, and I understand get the importance of getting other views, but if I'm going to be thinking about something that is of, significance, why am I asking every single people and tribe across the globe except for my own culture, and except for, what I happen to think? And this is something I want to toss out there, because I just don't think and I could be wrong, so correct me if I am. I don't think that our pagan ancestors concerned themselves with the opinions of people who were, for all intents and purposes, unconnected with them. If they were going to be concerned with the opinions of others, that would be, the members of their household, their family, their community members, who lives in the village. And then from there, maybe who lives in the village beyond that, because those are the people that you're actually dealing with. And you would be thinking about the land on which you're at, because that's the land you're actually occupying. What's going on another continent wouldn't have, the kind of day-to-day relevance for you. And that's more so the home-centric approach that I'm wanting to explore and toss out there and see what anyone else thinks about. Because one of the things that I'm thinking about is that, having an order of priorities, and I suppose that is a better way of putting it. What are your order of priorities? What is particularly when it comes to your spiritual attention? Because I'm thinking, home, the county in which that home resides, the state that county is in, the region that state occupies, the country that contains that region, and then we concern ourselves with what's going on in the rest of the world. Not ignore, but simply about, I'm going to think about these things closer to home that have more immediate impact upon me and my family and my spiritual life before I get concerned about things that are outside of that. So, what do people think? And I want to make it clear, I'm not criticizing anyone. And I appreciate that, Marcus, that you like this. Oh, I think I better get a drink of water. Oh, sorry about that. Across the street, a house was demolished, and they're working on clearing away the rubble today. And the dust has a way of coming through the windows, and it gets a bit rough on my throat. Sometimes I'm breathing in dust at just the wrong moment. But yes, and I suppose that really is what I'm after with the whole American Paganism and Witchcraft Project of let's look where we are at home. I mean, many of us have had, past generations of our family here for quite a while. Maybe it is time to start listening to what's around us and what we think. And this isn't about forgetting ancestral traditions, rather adapting them to where we actually are and when we actually are. And it isn't about forgetting or, altering beyond recognition spiritual concepts. I'm not talking about that. And I'm definitely not talking about forgetting our ancestral gods, especially since how hard we have had to work to get reconnected. But I am talking about not having the same mindset and approach of someone who actually lives on the ancestral homelands, because they're in a different position than we are. And I think it's time for us to really get real about that. And, and the gods, they're not fools. They know where we live. They know how much time has passed since the last time anyone in our bloodline called upon their names. They know how much the world has changed. They know language has changed and customs have changed and system of governance has changed. They're aware. They are probably aware in ways that we can't even discern. So I don't know if this is my own personal impulse or if other people are feeling this too. I do not get the feeling that they are expecting us to be carbon copies of what was, or even to be carbon copies of what our cousins overseas are doing. I'm not feeling that. I think they're expecting us to be here. Yeah, and like you say, Marcus. Marcus was saying we have our own special stuff here too. Yes, absolutely, we do. And that actually brings me up to the next thing I wanted to talk about. It was this video link. It was posted by one of the members of Blackbird's Brew. His name is Azamutu. And it was a clip of a conversation between the channel Norse Magic and Beliefs and a lady who was called Rune Guidance of the Norse. Now, their overall topic was trolldom, but the guest was an American practitioner. And one of the things that she talked about when she kind of wandered off onto a tangent is that she considers Niagara Falls to be a sacred site. She freely admits, I have no literature that says that. I don't have any information, no evidence, no proof that it was ever sacred, but I go there and I feel to the depths of my soul that it is sacred. And she also got into various animal guardian spirits that she personally works with, that she feels a connection to, animal spirits that just happen to be native to the United States. Now, I did not watch their full conversation, and considering the disposition of the host of Norse Magic and Beliefs, I'm wondering I'm wondering how he got on with her after that particular point, because he is Mr. Evidence, guys, and he is prone to rejecting anything that did not occur a few hundred years ago. He likes, I don't even want to say ultra traditional. He likes his perception of what that tradition was. He strikes me as being much more rules oriented than principle oriented. And there he was having a conversation with this American lady who was absolutely, I'm going to seize upon the principles, and the rules will just have to worry about themselves. So I am interested somewhat how the rest of their conversation went. Not interested enough to watch the whole thing, to be honest with you, just because I have to take him in small doses. But I love what she brought up. I love the fact that she wasn't just operating on her own judgment. Her her perception of Niagara Falls and other places she mentioned as being sacred. This, you could tell this wasn't an intellectual conviction. She goes there and she feels it. She knows it. Her senses, all of her senses, physical and spiritual, are reporting back to her that this is a special place and to treat it accordingly. And she went with it confidently, not asking permission, not consumed with doubt. She's just, I know this place is important and I will treat it accordingly. And that's just how I'm going to proceed. I love that. I absolutely love that. That is the attitude I am definitely looking for there. I think I think that's what we've got to see is that acknowledgement of, we're not going to have all of this research all of the time, but that doesn't mean that we do not have these special places. And we don't even need to go back to what the indigenous tribes happen to think was sacred, or what they thought about this spot or that place or whatever else, because that is, that's their own experiences. We don't know that we're going to have the exact same ones in the exact same spots with the exact same spirits. We don't know that. And we have no reason to think that. So when we are being reached out to and connected with on that spiritual, energetic level, I mean, let's go with it. Let's seize it. Let's start building up our own lore. Because let's face it, 500 years from now, whatever peoples are living on the United States, whatever pagans happen to be there, because there's always going to be pagans, are they really going to still have to look overseas for their spiritual information and their spiritual traditions? Or are they going to start looking at the era that began with the mid 20th century and say, okay, people came here and they were practicing this stuff and they had these ideas and they experimented and they explored, and these are the thoughts and this is what we have of that. And on the basis of that, I am now have a sense of who I am as a pagan. On a basis of that, I have an idea of what it means to connect with this land and the spirits thereof, as well as connecting with whatever ancestral gods see fit to communicate with me. A much more integrated, I am actually here kind of approach. And I think about that. What kind of legacy are we really building up for those who come after us? Because I mean, it's our responsibility to build that, whether you have kids or not. That does not that does not preclude you from leaving behind an important legacy. And even if people don't happen to remember our names, I'm not anticipating anyone will remember Brigantia Blackbird 500 years from now. Not that it would not satisfy my vanity if they did, but I'm not anticipating that. I'm not so arrogant as to presume that. But it doesn't mean that I can't be part of the conversations, and that those conversations can't weave together in order to leave something bigger than any of us individually, something that future generations can build upon. I'm just saying, it's worth taking into consideration. Now, before we go, okay. Actually, before I move on, I want to speak to Paddy, because Paddy's been commenting on Rumble. He says, do you think the spiritual energetic connection in our soul is our soul reconnecting to the place from the past, a spiritual connection to what was? I think partially, because I think what we're observing in American pagans is that we are experiencing these connections to ancestral lands, ancestral spirits, the whole ancestral worldview, but we are also getting steeped on the land we're actually on. Now, we could continue going on in kind of this bipolar, unintegrated way of, I'm going to have my heart yearning for far off places that I may never see and lands I may never walk. And, just kind of have an awareness that the land I'm on, has an importance, but I'm not really going to prioritize it. We could do that. Or we could say, I'm bringing these things together, that where I walk, so walk my gods, so walk my ancestors, so walk the spirits connected with my ancestral people, and it's intermingling with everything here. I mean, America is a crazy quilt, not just as regards to the peoples who have settled here, but spiritually as well. And I think we're in an interesting era where we're all trying to come to grips about what exactly does that mean, in practice, not just in theory, but actually in practice. But I mean, it's one of those things to where, the past is a starting point, but it also is not the present and it also is not the future. It's the beginning of wisdom, not the end. And I've said that also about why I'm personally am not a reconstructionist. And one thing I would remind anyone who is that there could be a reason why our gods allowed those old forms and the old ways to die for a period of time, because I do not believe for 1 millisecond that the God of Abraham is more powerful than the rest of our gods. I don't think he's more powerful than any one of them. I certainly do not think he is more powerful than all of the pagan gods collectively. I absolutely do not believe that. I reject that from its very premise. So I don't think that he or his followers had the power to break that link between our pagan ancestors and their gods if they had not already been in a spiritually weakened condition. I think something was going wrong. I think that's why it allowed that corrosive seed of Abrahamic monotheism to really take root. And I think that is what essentially led to all of the atrocities that followed from that. Something wasn't right. Something went wrong. So that's why I am much more concerned with what are the pagan principles that we find in our lore? What can we find from the common surviving proverbs from these cultures? Taking that information and think with us and incorporating it to how we live in the here and now. Because I think that's where we're going to find a lot more of our spiritual strengths. I think that's what we can build on. And I think that's also what might ultimately help us avoid remaking some of the mistakes that our ancestors may have made. One of the things that I've often called into question is that I will see a lot of Reconstructionists um, talk about how, oh, the gods don't have that much to do with you. I don't think they're paying this much attention to people, yada, yada, yada. Okay, fine. I will certainly agree that I do believe there are practitioners out there in the modern day who definitely overstate, either through deliberate deception or through self-delusion, about the degree to which the gods are actually involving themselves in their daily lives. However, once you strip that away, I think there's a lot of clear evidence, particularly amongst American pagans, that the gods are a lot more hands-on. And maybe it's because we're open to it. I mean, it could just be as simple as that. Maybe one of the reasons why their connections with our ancestors were severed is because our ancestors stopped, approaching them. Maybe they did have a crisis of faith as such. Maybe they were at a point where they were going through the motions. I mean, we're seeing something very similar in American culture right now. We have people, they might give lip service to the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but how are they actually conducting their affairs? There's a disconnect. There are people who are going through the motions of Americanism. There are people who have a very blind, very naive faith in institutions because they just do not understand that the people within those institutions do not exactly embody, let alone value, American values, but they're not willing to broach that subject in their minds, and that has had pretty disastrous consequences. It's things like that. It's when we get disconnected from the principles and ideas, that's when I think you really start to see problems within societies. I think that's why we're having problems right now. And I suspect, and I understand it's only suspect on my part, it is only theory, but my instinct is that something was going wrong. And now we have an opportunity for a fresh start. And I think, there's a lot to be said for really making the most of it. Let's see. And American Folklore podcast and Paranormal podcast, Haunted Pagan. I'm just going to call you by your gilded name. I'm sorry. He's commenting in Rumble. He says, "Are we possibly talking about a new cosmology, new gods, new sacraments?" Not so much new cosmology or new gods. I'm not sure about any of that. I'm certainly not proposing anything of that sort. As far as, gods, I think if anything else, we're seeing our old gods, our ancestral gods, having more relationships amongst themselves, possibly be because of just the process of their own descendants have intermarried through so many generations that they are essentially now all in-lawed. They're in-laws. And can you imagine? Can you imagine that family reunion? All of these various in-laws of perhaps of deities, families of deities who never expected to be connected in that way, but here we all are. Uh, I really think it's going to be more so be about worshiping the gods we know in a more American context, about the culture that we're in, and seeing their traits and their values and their virtues, and how that can have such a beneficial impact on our society. And as far as new sacraments, I mean, I would imagine that, I mean, the process of the forms of pagan worship, that's something that has always naturally evolved through time. I think in a lot of ways that'll take care of itself. Um, right now, where I'm at with the project is I'm trying to identify areas of common ground. And that's why I've started the conversation in the polls. Really revolving around common celebrations, because of course not everyone follows, the wheel of the year like Wiccans do or anything of that sort. But most pagan paths will acknowledge, around the solstices and the equinoxes, there's a shift of energies. There's a shift in nature. There's a shift in ourselves. There's a shift in the life stages that these things represent. There's things change. The world is not quite the same, and that's why you will find different cultures that are perhaps scattered across the world who do. Have something spiritual to say on these occasions, is because we are all feeling that. And I would imagine that seasonal celebrations are where a lot of American pagans will ultimately connect over, because even though that shift may not mean the same things to each person, and we may not always be honoring the same gods on this occasion, we are still acknowledging that that is a moment in time that is of significance to us, and it's time to take to pause and to make a spiritual occasion of it. I can see that. Now, that doesn't preclude us by any means of having, a lot of extras. I mean, depending on what gods you venerate, there may be additional celebrations. There may be cultural celebrations that we infuse more of our spirituality into, just because we see an opportunity to do that. And that this might reflect more so of my mindset as a practicing witch. When you practice the craft, your mind does get trained on a little bit more of an opportunistic bent, because as you start learning your skills and practicing your skills, well, you are looking for opportunities to doing this. You are looking to train yourself to become more aware of the energies that are around you at all times and what things come up, and being able to better detect and become more sensitive to those little shifts in the atmosphere in order to use them for good purpose. So maybe some of this is just coming from my mindset as a witch of, we have an opportunity. We must discuss these opportunities and we must figure out how to use these opportunities. Maybe for for a non-witch pagan, there wouldn't be necessarily the same mindset. But that's another reason why I'm bringing this to my whole pagan community, because we don't always think the same way, and we're not looking through things through the exact same lens. And going through the process of having these discussions, I think it will be valuable, no matter what the ultimate conclusions are. And there could very well be a lot of different conclusions. And sometimes I think some of the differences that I think will arise quite naturally will be having to do with the different regions in which we live. I mean, the United States is a huge country. I mean, you leave aside Hawaii and Alaska, which are uh, you know a little bit more disconnected from us. They are in very different places than where the rest of the 488 are. But just think about the different regions. You have, the north, you have the south, you have the southwestern deserts, you have the swamps, in Florida and Alabama and Louisiana, Mississippi. You have, the Great Plains, you have the Rockies, you have the Appalachians, you have all that. There's some really interesting energies and some very interesting ley lines that go all through New England. There's a whole other atmosphere that's going on in Montana. Then you have California, which is its own brand of special for a variety of reasons. We're not having the same year in, year out experiences with our local environments. So as we become more rooted where we are, I think we will start seeing more natural regional differences arise. Like I mentioned, Druid Foxx earlier, she's just now going to be hosting a celebration of the apple blossoms because she's in Minnesota and they're just now seeing signs of life. Whereas, if you go down to where my friend Georgia Liberty lives in Georgia, well, she's had spring for quite some time. This woman has been gardening. She is starting to, get, cucumbers and beans and things of that nature. She's had flowers blooming when I was just saying, please, please don't get frostbite and die. We're having different experiences, even though we're all in the same country. So if you were to start seeing a rising up of localized pagan communities, it will probably be people who are existing in similar environments and similar time zones, who will have a lot more in common amongst themselves, even though there might be this broader agreement that, throughout the year, there are these shifts of the energy. So I don't know if that's clear as mud or not, but that is the answer that I have for you off the top of my head at this moment. Okay, now to the last thing that I want to really get to. Let's see. Oh yes, I have terrible handwriting, so forgive me. My notes are interesting, but it has to do with it is how we are sometimes blind to that which is around us. We're used to it, we don't notice it, we take it for granted. It's ordinary, so it doesn't really get the full measure of our attention. This can happen in our environments. It can happen in our marriages, as many people have had difficulties. It happens in our families. When we're used to things, we're not really taking notice of them in a conscious way because they're just there. It's just there. And I think that is what is sometimes difficult for us as Americans because we are a younger country, but we've been here just long enough to where we do have kind of that blindness to ourselves about what it means to be American, different cultures within the United States, different traditions, things of that sort. So, we're so used to it. It seems ordinary. It doesn't seem special to us. And it does not help that we've had the influence of Marxists for over 100 years, actively telling us how everything about us is evil and horrible and awful, and it shouldn't be done and it shouldn't exist. Yeah, that is not helping us. It is certainly not helping us psychologically, even those of us who reject that nonsense, because, we're under this constant attack and we're always having to come to the defense. And a lot of us are saying we need to be more proactive when it comes to defending our traditions, and we should be more on the offensive about this. Start attacking the Marxism in a much more effective way, so that people stop feeling ashamed for what they've inherited, for their common American heritage. And that is when you think about it, what a grossly horrible thing that is, that we have lost sight of that. Not just through kind of the natural neglect that happens, when you're not sufficiently appreciative of what you have, but also just as a result of attack. Horrible situation. And that got me to thinking about what might be helpful an approach for this huge project of discovering, exploring, and trying to establish American paganism and witchcraft. Maybe we need to start studying our own homegrown culture the same way that we would study a culture outside of ourselves. Now, what I mean by that is that, if I decided to study, Japan or England or Australia or Iceland or whatever else, well, there's a lot of things I would look for. I'm like, well, what are the different eras of their history? What kind of landscape do they live on? What kind of crops do they grow? What animals do they raise? What kind of architecture do they favor? What languages do they speak? What is their accent like? And depending upon all of these things, you can pretty quickly see a unique signature to these various different places. There's something of the place that has come up organically that is recognizable. For instance, if you saw a picture of Japanese architecture, it's Japanese architecture. If you hear an English person speak, regardless of what region of England they are from, they are English. You can hear it. It's recognizable. And you're looking for it. You are looking for these things that are different from yourself and that are unique to that particular culture. And so you're able to recognize it, and that helps your lines of inquiry. I'm suggesting that so far as what is humanly possible, we do the same for ourselves. See, and before I go on with my rambling, Marcus says, I've noticed a lot of different people that I wouldn't normally suspect have started liking, sharing, and agreeing in comment with witchcraft and pagan things that I've been sharing. It's very interesting. That is fantastic news. I am very glad to hear that. I really feel like the land itself is crying out for people to rediscover that connection and forge that connection in some cases for the very first time. And that's the other thing. If somehow all traces of pagan civilization was lost, if we absolutely not just destroyed, not just compromised, not just crippled, but if all of it was really and truly legitimately gone, I have every faith that pagan spirituality would arise again. Maybe we would discover some of the same gods, some of the same names, generations apart. I honestly believe that it could absolutely all come back from absolute scratch if it had to, because that's how it started. It started from that point of zero. And if worse comes to worse, it could do that again. Now, thankfully, we're not in that situation. But the fact that people who aren't really tuned into this sort of thing are suddenly resonating with it, I think that's a really encouraging sign. And while I'm doing that, okay, no new comments on Rumble. Okay, so exploring ourselves, studying ourselves. Think about our different historical eras and think about how things looked at that time. And I mean that in the most literal sense. When the colonies first broke away, what areas of the country were they in? What were the common architectural styles? How did people dress? What were the common manners? That is something that is very identifiably American. And then if you fast forward to, say, the era of the Civil War, very definable, very recognizable architecture and people's way of being and their fashions and all these other things. It all comes together, at least together, as something very uniquely American. And it comes again with the westward expansion. And also when you fast forward to, say, the 20th century, I mean, you see a building from the 1920s or 30s, you recognize it. You see those lines of Art Deco, and you know exactly what era it came from. If you have even a cursory knowledge of history, you have an idea of what was the mood of the country, where were people at, what were their greatest challenges. We understand these things. We have just become disconnected from it, and we have, as I said before, we are a crazy quilt. We have all of these different influences that are converging and coming together and wrestling against one another, and sometimes it's just dovetails perfectly, and sometimes it does not. But that's also very American, that endless struggle. I don't think we really know who we are without having some kind of strife. There's something about, I think, the land itself that challenges people, in our minds and in our spirits. I think it does force us to reconsider everything and think about whether or not something fits. And honestly, I would love to see things more unique to ourselves uh, to develop, not just with pagan spirituality, but just how we do things in this country, the kind of buildings that we look to. Now, I love a lot of the architectural influences that have come all over the world. I really love the beauty of them. I appreciate that. They absolutely have their place, and I would not want a country without them. But going forward, I would love to see new styles that are uniquely us. I would love us to start having buildings that seem as though that they could be nowhere else, that they just came right up out of the ground, and there's something about it that is just recognizably American. And I would like to see that with our culture as well. I'm tired of us apologizing for ourselves. I'm tired of us feeling guilty of anything that makes us uniquely us. I mean, we can be proud of our country without crossing the line into hubris. And I think that also feeds into things spiritually as well, because our pagan ancestors, their spirituality and their culture, they were not these get disconnected things. This idea of your spirituality being this compartmentalized, separated thing, that's very odd. that is very unique to this particular era. It definitely has not been normal throughout the whole course of the world. And I'm not talking about, having a pagan takeover or, having a unification between pagan spirituality and state. I'm not talking about anything that insane, but I am talking about allowing our culture and our spirituality to blend, and for one to really be an outgrowth of the other. And I would like us to have greater influence, if for no other reason, so I could stop hearing these obnoxious talking heads talking about how this country was founded on biblical principles. It really is tap dancing on my nerves. I was listening to an interview that Dave Rubin did with Senator Josh Hawley just the other day, and Josh Hawley, who he went to the Bible again, and look, I get it. I'm not expecting people of Abrahamic traditions to throw that away, but I would like a little bit of modesty. I would like them to have a little bit of historical awareness that there is not an institution in this country, in its concept, from the idea of a republic to democratic processes to separation of state, to the idea that maybe you don't need to be completely controlling your neighbor at all times. Every single one of that you can trace back to pagan religion and pagan philosophy. I mean, where would we be without Aristotle? I would like us to start saying thank you to Aristotle and the other pagan intellectual giants that formed the thinking of a lot of the philosophers of the Enlightenment. And the fact of the matter is, our country came out of the Enlightenment. But what did the Enlightenment come out of? Well, it came out of the rediscovery of pagan philosophy, which is why they started telling the churches, mind your own, stay in your lane. Stop touching every single thing. Stop expecting to exercise absolute power or to be, manipulating other people in their offices because of your spiritual authority. That didn't come about because people were applying Bible principles. You did not have people able to peacefully coexist with religious differences because they applied Bible principles. No, it is pagan principles that allowed us to exist, to be ourselves, to be able to have self-determination without killing each other. It's an astonishing concept, isn't it? We have a lot to offer, and I would absolutely love to see us be a little bit more proud about that, a lot more vocal about that, and to have that be more of the public consciousness. Oh, and comment on Rumble from Paddy's Parlour Games. Kitty is saying the American log cabin only here, and they look so natural here. Absolutely. And that's the sort of thing I was talking about earlier. I mean, and she's quite right. Where else would you find the American log cabin? Where else would you find, the American farmhouse, the white farmhouse in the Midwest with the red barn off to the side? And the one-room schoolhouses that, once educated the local children in the community. These are things that are uniquely American. I mean, these are very good examples. And I would love to see things of that nature continue on. I think now, I don't think that, Victorian, of course, we borrow that from the Victorian Englands. Although, if you look at Victorian English architecture and American Victorian architecture, they have some pretty noticeable distinct differences. And I think the Victorian aesthetic is, I think it's a very representative of the American aesthetic, is that we have all these different influences, and sometimes we successfully combine it to make our own thing, and sometimes it's not so successful. I think it's a very good metaphor for who and what we are. But I would also like to see perhaps also modern architecture and aesthetics kind of have that I came up from the ground itself kind of feel, not the rubbishy kind of modern stuff. I can't stand that stuff. It's ugly and it will not last. And when the time comes to take down those buildings, I, for one, will not be feeling guilty. But I would like us to have something that continues. I would like us to continue building a future, and, keeping alive the good things of the past, preserving the good things in our past, but also moving forward and continuing to grow as a people, pagan or non-pagan alike. See, and Marcus has some more things to say. He says the founders wrote freedom of religion for a reason. Absolutely. They understood the kind of violence that can comes from religious divides amongst denominations that think that their way is the only right way and that no one has the right to say no. The right of refusal is extremely important in our culture. Let's see. And he also says, give me an old log cabin in the middle of the woods and I'd be happy. Yeah, a lot of people would. My husband certainly would. Sometimes I think he thinks of the family farm. It's like, gosh, if something ever happened there, I just want to go out to the woods and build a cabin and have something be real rustic. And then, he'd be quite content. And then, he'd have to contend with me saying, oh, we can move out to the woods, honey, but I'd like it to be built of stone. Could we do stone? Stone is a little bit more permanent. But, that is a marital problem, not an architectural problem. But it does go to show that when we think about going back to our roots and getting back to things that are very simple, getting back to the basics and the fundamentals of things, that image of the log cabin, that image of the frontier, that image of being the person who comes somewhere and establishes something, that is very much part of our psyche. And now we're in this interesting period of history where we're not just establishing something, but we're also getting into a chapter where we need to think, how can we continue on the good things about what we established? What needs to be redone? What needs to maybe to be reassessed or tweaked? But what can we do to actually continue it on? And that's a pretty difficult challenge. I mean, we're great at building things. We are fantastic at building things. but we kind of suck at maintenance, and we really suck about the continuation of good traditions. We have a much harder time making the case for that, and I think part of the reason is because it's not as exciting. It just is not as exciting as the thrill of building something new with your bare hands from the ground up, and let's face it, a lot of Americans have adrenaline junkie issues, so I don't know how we solve for that. Oh, and we have a rather opprobrious remark in the Rumble. Someone called Morehoused. He says, "Enjoy hell, you loser freaks." And it would appear that we have someone from the monotheistic traditions come to hassle us. And here's what I will say to that person. Number one, if you honestly believe in the whole Abrahamic monotheistic worldview, the first thing you need to do is start reviewing your own uh, doctrine, because the determination of who does and does not go to hell does not lie within human hands, and it's actually going very contrary to the Jesus's message of spreading the good word, of going around telling people that they're going to hell as if you're looking forward to that. I don't think that's really what he had in mind when he was telling his followers to love their neighbors. So, you might be a little bit more worried about your own relationship with your God than worried about our own particular convictions. And for another thing, we have freedom of religion. And ultimately, who we believe runs the universe. This is in the realm of belief. It is in the realm of opinion. We might feel that we all have very good reasons for our own personal beliefs and opinions, but at the end of the day, they are just opinions. And we may very well, once we all shed the mortal coil, as we all do, we may find that a lot of our opinions, we're not entirely aligned with reality. We might get to the other side and be like, oh, no, that's not actually how that works. But we understand why you thought that. We understand why you thought that. And, who knows? Who knows how many lessons there are for us to learn in the afterlife? And by lessons, I mean actual lessons, instructions, and a more positive framework. I think that in a lot of ways, the gods have much better things to do than to figure out ways to try to torture us for all of eternity. I mean, when it comes to punishment, we're pretty good at doing that ourselves. I mean, I'm sure we've all watched people who make the same mistakes over and over and over again in their lives to absolutely disastrous consequence. And they created their own hell. They did not need any further external punishment because they were doing enough to ruin their own lives. And that's the beautiful thing about pagan spirituality, is that it does absolutely encourage people to take on the adult responsibility of realizing that what you do absolutely impacts everything. That if you have a rotten life, well, you may have had rotten things happen to you, but the odds are pretty good that you also made some pretty rotten choices to go along with that. And I think that's something that's quite unique to paganism, in the way it holds people accountable in this, not in this you need to be punished forever sort of way, but rather you had the ability to make different decisions. And now that you have realized that this is a problem, you can make different decisions going forward. You will still experience the consequences of your actions, but you can start sowing the seeds for better consequences down the road. So there is that. Ah, and Haunted Pagan said that he was feeling the love and that he hopes there are marshmallows. Yeah, and I think that's the way we've got to respond to those kinds of remarks. Um, I don't know what really motivates people saying that. I don't go around telling people of other religions, like, boy, you're going to have a lot to answer for your ancestors. Wait till you get to the other side and you're in Helheim, and boy, you'll be held accountable then. I don't really do that. I really, really don't. I mean, okay, I do make the exception. I will sometimes say something similar about politicians, but I mean, the politicians in our society, they are doing so much to destroy people, regardless of religion or race or sex or gender expression or any of the other million divisions we have. They are actively working against the interests of every single citizen. And, there are some things that jail can't punish enough. I'll put it that way. So let's see. I think that is all I've got on my notes. Only other thing is that with the project, with all of the various channels that I have available in the Gilded group, what I'm doing is that I'm giving, honestly, people to have opportunities and room for feedback. Share your own original thoughts, share your opinions in the surveys, vote in the various polls, and just creating that space and that opportunity for us to really have these important conversations amongst ourselves. And I'm much more, I'm not really looking for, do people agree with me or do people disagree with me? I'm looking for what is everyone's line of reasoning? What led them to their conclusions? What is the foundation of their conclusions? Why do I think the same or why do I think differently? And having an exchange and going back and forth, and an opportunity for us to really put our opinions to the test, in a respectful and a constructive way, and to take and to just look past the end of our own noses, because that's a really difficult thing to get past. Sometimes I can get so trapped in our heads. I know I certainly can. And it's good to have a moment when we can get beyond that and say, oh, okay, from their vantage point, this looks a little bit differently, and I can actually understand that. It's refreshing. It's refreshing, and I think we are part of doing something really good. I think we're doing ourselves a favor for future generations of pagans, and honestly, I think we're doing ourselves a favor for future reincarnations of ourselves. Let's see, and Marcus says, fear, quite simply, people like that are scared because of people with different beliefs coming together and they don't like that. Well, there's nothing quite so threatening to the existing ruling order than people who are able to connect across various lines, and people who are able to say, I don't agree with you about this, but I'm still your neighbor. And I don't have any ill will towards you. And I wish, the best for you. And that's a pretty powerful thing. And that's also, I think, what is really making a lot of these institutions, whether it's governments or whether it's mainstream religions or anything else, is that you have a lot of people taking a look at these structures and they're saying, what exactly do I need you for? And that's a pretty big question, because I was asking myself that question when I was breaking free from my indoctrination from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And when I realized that, I could look at that Bible myself, I could draw my own conclusions, I could do research myself. There was nothing that was not available to me that they had, and that I had the power of my own brain. And ultimately, it would be whether or not I had a relationship with that God, not whether or not I was following in lockstep with their authority structure, that was what would make the difference. Once I got to that point, I found myself very ready to walk away from that religion, and I found it very easy to do so when the time very really came for it. And for all we know, there are people who are going through a very similar process with religions they were brought up with, or with some of these more whacked out social movements that are all about the doom, the gloom, and why you're such a horrible person and how you can never make up for it. Some people are starting to come to their senses about that. And they're looking at all of these authoritarian governments. They're looking at these feudalistically minded corporations, and they're saying, I just don't think you really add anything to my life. You don't spark joy, as Marie Kondo would say. And I think that these big institutions are starting to get the rather frightening idea that they're the ones who have to justify their existence to us, not the other way around. So let's see. And I think that does it for today. I'm caught up on the comments from Rumble and YouTube. Thank you very much, everyone who tuned in with me to have this conversation. I hope to see you on the Gilded Group soon. I hope we start having more lively conversations. And of course, as time goes on, I will bring more about the progress and things that have come up with this whole project to the live streams. And hopefully we can attract more people to this project and get more input. And therefore, start getting a better sense, a more cohesive sense of who we really are and what we can really build together. Also, if you are a member of Blackbird's Brew, do not forget to vote in that poll. You have the power to determine what Georgia, Amanda, and I are going to be discussing on the Thursday live stream. So use that power and let us know what you want to hear us talk about. But that'll do it for now. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.